going to try to do is from a human perspective or from a personal perspective. When we experience change, or as leaders that we've worked with quite a lot during COVID times, either driving change, experiencing change, or contemplating change, what are the factors that leads us to think that they're the key considerations for a good or an innovative change process? So when we look at the topic today, which half do we keep? I think it is important for us to deep dive in the way that the topic or the question is being phrased. Instead of saying which half do we forgo, we say which half do we keep. So bearing in mind, this is a very different approach to looking at either restructuring or looking at change or looking at how we respond to change. Because if we say which half do we keep, this is an asset-based thinking, meaning we have in mind what our future business would look like. We have in mind what our future strategy would be. And then we look into what we have currently in our portfolio from an asset perspective. What do we need to succeed? Instead, sometimes we see that companies or organizations or leadership teams who are slightly not that apt for change discussions, they will go towards the direction of saying, which half do we forgo? It's more a deficit-based discussion. So what we'd like to address today is an asset-based discussion, meaning in order for us to achieve as a company or an organization the future strategy, what is it that we need from an asset perspective? So that's how we would like to anchor today's question. There has been quite a lot of discussion with regards to change. So one of the pulse checks that I invite you all when you're watching our show and currently contemplating questions that we're sort of inspiring or throwing at everybody is that, have you had a change discussion with your team in the past few months? If the answer is yes, or if the answer is more than once, I think you have a higher chance of succeeding in change, because change requires thought, change requires communication. And in the previous episodes, what we've shared with you is the importance of communication and change. So, but on the other hand, if you said, well, Laura, Mei Wai, we have not yet had a discussion with our team on the change that we want, or we have not sit down and put together a point of view of different stakeholders in our organization, I would highly recommend that you start planning it or doing so. So the first thing is how we define the question. Is it asset-based? Is it deficit-based? The second question that we would like to ask on this notion is that when we look at a change environment, and without any question, we're in a very high change environment currently. And if you look at it, very much like how we look at our investment portfolio, in a high risk, in a high return, low return, we will adjust how our portfolio is being structured in order for us to achieve a certain return of a certain time frame. So I'd like to invite us all to also experiment how we look at our human asset portfolio. Could be in a very similar framework. Previously, we would be looking very much at full-time engagement, full-time employees, and long-term contracts, for instance. But now, more and more often, we're hearing the flourishing of project-based, task-based, function-based, or for newer generations, the proliferation of what we call slashies, meaning you are an individual person, but you plug into different functions or you plug into different projects very easily and without a lot of need to integrate, because you are in that mindset of utilizing yourself as a tool, as a knowledge worker, but not from a long-term full-time employment perspective. So the second question that we invite you to think about is, when we think about which half do we keep, we not only think of the asset that you need, we also think about the type of asset, the engagement, or the having the asset mode or means does that need to change. So imagine if we have those two questions in mind, I would recommend three key considerations when we look at human as an asset or teams as an asset. So the first thing is, when we look at currently in times of change or in times of anticipated change, what are the type of skills that we need? Traditionally, I think it would be safe to say that we treasure specialization, meaning someone who is very specialized in one task, who can do it really well, would be more valued than a generalist. But I think you would agree with me that during this year, a lot of times we would say that, you need to be able to come out, if you're a specialized worker, you need to be able to come out from your skill set and look at the bigger picture, because the way that specialized skill set is being framed, structured, and molded previously no longer work now. Even specialization is different. So if you are a manager or if you're a team leader, look at how you would like to balance the proportion of specialized team members and generalist team members. And oftentimes we see that specialized team workers, if you add in certain training on communication, on empathy, on design thinking, you'll be able to extract that generalist ability out of them. So that's the first thing that I would recommend. And when we look at the human factor, are you looking at specialized workers or are you looking at generalist workers? What's the balance between the two? The second is in terms of mindset, particularly in a volatile, in VUCA world, we would highly recommend that we look at mindsets that are growth mindsets instead of fixed mindsets. And to be familiar with the growth mindset, it would mean constantly looking for ability to do better and to extract what is the situation and to be able to utilize that situation to your benefit. Fixed mindset, typically you hear them saying, this is how it's done, I will not change, or we used to do it this way, why are we changing? But growth mindset people, chances are they will be saying, is there a different way? Is there a different meaning to this? So in times of change, I think the proportion of growth mindset needs to outweigh fixed mindset, at least for a short period of time, because you are in a constantly changing world. So imagine if you're managing your leadership team, do you have sufficient growth mindset people in them? And the third consideration is whether or not we're able to realign interests. And by realigning interests, I would take reference to what we oftentimes refer to the game theory, which is a very rational, strategy-based way of aligning interests of teams. So traditionally or previously, before all these changes or innovations happened, I would guess that your team across all different layers, vertically or horizontally, they should have aligned a certain interest, vision, goal. Hence, your organization is functioning very effectively. But then if you are experiencing change, or if you have had change discussions with your team, chances are that the incentive or the trigger point of doing work out of their own will has changed. Is it a company vision? Does it align with the personal value? Is the purpose of what they're doing very clear and also aligned with the individual, organization, and team value? Because if there is, then you would very much be able to capture the output of a team that is dedicated and that is very willing and aligns with your organizational value. So a quick summary of what I believe is extremely important nowadays. When you redefine your organization or when you're looking at change conversations, try to utilize an asset-based question skill, meaning look at which half you want to keep instead of looking at which half you want to forgo. And the second is when you're looking at your asset, consider the different types of engagements or the different types of asset portfolio that you're able to put together. And there are quite a lot of change in that area we observe. And on that level, try to look for specialized generalist ratio change. Try to look for whether or not there is sufficient growth mindset in your organization, and also try to look for whether or not it is an aligned interest throughout this change. Has anything moved or has any parts of the puzzle moved? Because you would definitely want an aligned team.